All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I am Angela Lazar, Digital Project Coordinator from NCEA, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A window. We will monitor the questions and try to answer them within the allotted time. Specifically, we'll be focused on answering them towards the end of the webinar. So if you want to input your questions as we go, we'll get to all of them as we get towards the end of the webinar. So at the end of this session, I will share a link to the online survey and how to receive a certificate of completion for the webinar. And for today's webinar, exploring new federal guidance documents to assure more equitable services in federal programs. You will learn to fully utilize the range of federal benefits accessible to Catholic school students and educational personnel. We will discuss valuable insights and strategies and practical advice to optimize the potential of all the available federal programs. And our speaker today is NCEA's very own Sister Dale McDonald. She is the Vice President of Public Policy at NCEA and a sister of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Prior to NCEA, Sister McDonald was Director of Catholic School Leadership Program in the Boston College Graduate School of Education. She served on various boards of trustees for educational and social service organizations. She is also published in educational journals and books, and she's served on several committees convened by the White House, the U.S. Department of Education, and the United States Conference of Bishops and other national Catholic associations. And she has also testified before congressional committees on education policy issues. So before I turn it over to Sister Dale, let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, you sent forth your Son as a beacon of hope for all people. As a teacher, he has given us the prime example of the importance of education. As disciples, we look to him for inspiration and strength. Thank you for the many people who have dedicated their lives in service to our Catholic schools. Thank you for the teachers and administrators who sustain our schools. Thank you for the parents who have given support and witness to the importance of Catholic education. Thank you for the students who work hard to further their education. Bless all of our Catholic schools and the many people who advance our mission. May our schools be a home for those who seek to grow in openness, faith, love, intellect, and a commitment to justice. In your name, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So thank you for joining us today, Sister Dale. Please feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Angela, and welcome all. I'm happy to be here with you to go over some of the new guidance documents that are available for our schools to get better participation, more equitable participation in the federal programs. So what I would like to look at today are the laws, regulations, and guidance. Each piece of legislation is not a standalone. It has regulations and guidance that accompany it, and we'll see what the difference is. I'll talk a little bit about the regulations and the regulatory process, and then focus on guidance documents. The two primary guidance documents for the education are the ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then I'll talk a little bit about how to use the documents for more effective consultation outcomes. So when we're talking about education legislation, we're looking at laws, regulations, and guidance. Congress passes the laws, but then they have to be enacted. And that enactment is delegated to the federal agency that has responsibilities for education. It would be the U.S. Department of Education. And within the law, they are given authority to implement it. And the law itself usually contains, myriads of intricate sections related to funding and other specific ways in which the law is to be carried out. And we're talking about laws that are often hundreds of pages long. And the regulations, and so then they go into regulations to try to break that down into understandable and manageable pieces that can actually be worked on. the regulations that the Cabinet Department is dealing with and, makes the rules to determine how the law will be carried out, by whom and how, and et cetera. So I'll do a little more detail on that as I get to the next couple of slides. The guidance are the instructions that are intended to clarify the regulation. You go from these huge laws into regulations, and then you work your way down to guidance. So as the regulations are being implemented, there are sometimes confusion. Questions arise that were not foreseen, or differences in interpretation of the regulations are being done in various places, and then someone questions the department that's responsible for, what's the real interpretation of this? So then the agency will look at the questions that are coming in or the issues that are being raised and produce guidance documents. The guidance documents are, again, clarification, and they are supposed to reflect the intent of the law as expelled out in the regulations, and then offer an explanation really for why the department is interpreting it the way it is. So as I said earlier, the two major laws that we deal with in the Catholic education community are the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. That was the original federal aid to education law. And it has gone through several rewrites, reauthorizations over the years. The current ESEA bill, which was passed in the 95th Congress, the 114th Congress, the 95th piece of legislation, is 392 pages long. And those pages are 8-point type on tissue thin paper. So it's a long, tedious read. The participation of private school children is found in section 1011. It used to be 1117, but in the earlier versions. But in section 1011, we have the specifics that apply to how private school children and their teachers are to acquire supplemental services. Each time that the ESEA was amended, it's been given another name. Most of you may remember it as NCLB back a few years ago, and now it's the Every Student Succeeds Act. However, Congress and the federal agencies always still refer to it as ESEA. So whether I'm saying ESEA or I'm saying ESSA, it's the same law. It's the version that was passed in 2015. And then the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's 162 pages long. But the sections pertaining to our students whose parents choose our schools for their child are found in section 612. So I am not really going to deal with IDEA today. I'm doing another webinar on that in this series down the road. So today we're going to focus on ESEA and the regulations and guidance, particularly the guidance that applies, that stems from that. So the regulatory process, this is a formal process that the agency goes through, and it has to be a public process. So the requirement is that the agency proposing regulations generally has to go through the Federal Register website. It posts up, these are proposed regulations, and it sets a timeline for anyone who wants to reply, and it's a general public thing. So anybody, an individual who might have an interest or an organization is invited to submit comments. You can disagree, you can agree, and say, I particularly want to emphasize this is important for my agency, and so on, or offer something that wasn't in there at all. You haven't thought about this, but this is what would make it easier for, or more effective, whatever. So NCEA always files when it's an education issue that's going to impact us. We work with CAPE, the Council for American Private Education, and we try to individually put our thoughts together and have a collective response from CAPE. But then the individuals submit their own comments, and I usually add to that something that may be specific to Catholic education that does not necessarily apply across the board. So after the deadline expires, the comments are reviewed and then are either promulgated as final rule that there aren't too many changes that they think need to be made, or they make the changes and add some other changes and put it out for a second go round. But in any case, when the rule is absolutely final, it has the force of law. So it is legally binding on whoever it applies to. And you can find all those. They're in the Code of Federal Regulations. You see things sometimes in the pieces journal you may be reading, it will say CFR with a number that tells you where to find it in the Code of Federal Regulations. Then we have the guidance documents. So the important thing is that this is a suggestion from the agency about how this should be applied. It gives you kind of the insight into the mind of the department, so that if you were to go through some kind of an appeals process, this is probably how they would rule. But what's important is that the actual decision of whoever the rulemaker is in interpreting the guidance does not have the force of law. And in the education department, when they put these documents out, they're called non-regulatory guidance, because while they have to comply with what's in the law and in the regulations, they do allow for some differences of interpretation. But what's important is that the interpretation and the guidance can differ from the interpretation that's in the actual statements that are in the law and in the regulations. And this is important if you get into some kind of conflicts over, well, it says it here in the regulations. Well, is it in the regulations or is it in the guidance? You have to be careful, because if it's in the guidance, they don't necessarily have to follow it. I had an incident a couple of years ago when the new version came out, and school had contacted me, and I dealt with the LEA officer who had been speaking with the ombudsman. And he basically told me that he did not want to approve it because he just didn't think it was right and he didn't like it. And I told him he was certainly very able to not like it. That was his privilege, but he had to do it because the law said it was applicable. And so, he reluctantly agreed and approved the request from the local school. But this is where, having the information you need when you're dealing with the public school officials and trying to go through the consultation process, that you're clear, is it a directive or is it actually a regulation? The guidance are directives. And so the three main guidance documents that our schools should be familiar with and refer to constantly are the guidance documents for Title I, Part A. That's the program that most of our schools have some participation, at least our elementary schools. And that's where the students are selected for special remediation services. Title VIII of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is the document we'll spend most of the time on today, deals with all of the other programs which our schools are able to access. And then IDEA has guidance documents that deal directly with serving students with special needs. Again, that last one I will be doing in a separate webinar down the road. So Title VIII guidance, the new document that came out, refers to programs covered by Title VIII, which are these here: the Part 1C, migratory children; Part 2A, supporting effective instruction, which is basically your PD, your professional development; Title III for English language learners; Part 4, student support and academic enrichment grants; then Part 4 also has the 21st Century Learning Centers; and then Part F, which deals with Project Serve. That's emergency relief programs. Our schools are eligible to participate in all of these in addition to Title I. So the first part of the guidance deals with general directives. These sections A through F have applications that are general across the board. Like Section 8 A starts with the consultation requirements, and there's some really important explanations in there about what is required to have a genuine consultation experience. In this last renewal of the legislation, when we were doing advocacy work on behalf of our Catholic schools, our private schools, we tried to overcome the perception that, consultation was timely and meaningless. The law has said since the beginning, timely and meaningful consultation, and it really meant very little. And so what we were able to achieve in this authorization are very concrete steps to what makes the consultation an actual consultation and not just a meeting. And it's important that the various steps that are there are followed. They're outlined in the law, they're outlined in the regulations and the guidance. And so they give a little more input to that in this current document. Section B, which deals with the allocations and expenditures, how the proportionate share is determined, the various pieces of management, basically, that have questions have arisen about, and that they're answered there carefully. I think in this section, options for providing services, where they really reiterate again that third-party providers are perfectly acceptable part of the law, but the school by school, the pooling has various examples there. By pooling of funds, what the law talks about is for different schools within a district to combine funds so that you can have a more robust program, or districts to combine the private school funding across districts, so that for particularly, as I said, small schools where you don't have a lot of funding available, by combining with a couple of other schools, and they can be other private schools, not necessarily Catholic schools, that you can provide a more robust professional development program, for instance, or even, a Title I program that may have like a summer school component to it, or something of that effect. So there's carefully spelled out ways in which you can access this example of how to provide services. And then section C deals with the delivery of services, and that goes through eligibility, and that goes through what, when, where, why, and how, everything that was related to providing the services for the students, and if applicable, their teachers and parents in some cases. So they're clearly written suggestions, clearly written examples that would be well to pay attention to. And then section D deals with the state ombudsman. And that is the person that was created in this law. That's a state level person that is really a mediator between the district and the private school and the state education department. There are not a lot of very specific roles and responsibilities assigned in the law, other than that the ombudsman is to monitor the implementation and be sure that what the law says is available to private schools, students, teachers, etc., is made available truly. And so they have suggestions in that part of the guidance for dealing with the ombudsman, and that's just something we should pay attention to, because the ombudsman is often a step that will moderate and will mediate for your school if you are in the right in terms of the law and the guidance and the regulations, and avoid having to go through more unpleasantness at the district level or even at the state level. Section E deals with particulars about, Section E deals with complaints, direct provider with the SEA, regulations for bypass. That section pretty much spells out how you go about expressing your, in some cases, misunderstanding on the part of the district with you, or get greater clarification. So again, step by step is listed there and should be observed by both parties, the district and the private school. So then section F deals with non-applicable government regulations. This is a good section in this document from the perspective of demystifying some of the rumors that are out there that the federal government will take over if you take these programs, that you become a recipient of financial assistance, and then you have to follow all the Title IX guidance. You have to have the military recruiters come in and deal with your school. It clarifies all of that as not being applicable to schools that do not take federal funding. And if we're participating in any of these title programs, you never take funding. You take goods and services that the district pays for to some other person. The school never gets reimbursed. A teacher may get reimbursed if a teacher decides to go to a professional development activity and pays in advance. The teacher can get reimbursed by the district, but not the school. So that, section F clarifies that. Then you have program specific. So all of what I mentioned prior to this are points that have happened across the board, so that whatever program you're in, these are specific things that apply. If you are in a particular program, and you'll notice that Title I has its own specific guidance, and that's much more complicated. The consultation, some of the pieces in the general I just talked about are in Title I, but this is how it applies across the board. So now we're coming to the part that has the specific programs. So section G starts the program specifics. And if you have not downloaded these documents, I would hope that, all of you have this copy before you in case you want to ask questions from it. But, it's about 50 pages, but it's worth downloading. It's worth the paper so that you have it if you need it to share, and so on. So section G starts program specific, and this is Title I, Part C, the education of migratory children. This is aimed at two categories of students, those in the agricultural or in the fishing industry. Students who, because of their parents' job or guardian's job, or in some older students, perhaps their own, they have to follow the work. And so they are trying to provide in this section for students who hit several different schools during a school year, and trying to bridge the gaps between the programs, academic programs, and even some of the social and emotional behavioral components that might be part of that experience. So I have yet to meet anyone in Catholic schools when I'm doing these in public groups who use that program, but it is one that's available, provides help for the student and for the teachers who are trying to work with such students. This is the one that we'll spend most of the time on, section H, Title II. Okay, this is the supporting effective instructions. The different pieces of it are outlined here. The beginning, the purpose, eligibility for participation, state and LEA program. So basically, it lines up that this section of the law is looking at making sure that students have teachers who are professionally prepared, who are able to have the academic knowledge and some of the other, soft skills that are needed to work with students so that they can achieve. What's important in all of these programs across the board is the focus is on the student. What does the student need? And then what will help the student meet the needs that they right now can't. And so professional development is to prepare the educational personnel so that students have an opportunity to learn effectively. So the eligibility for participation, and the state and local programs. In this Section 8, Title II, Part A, there is funding reserved at the state level that might have statewide programs that require eligibility for private school participation. And then at the state level, most of the programs are run at the state level. A big issue that they make note of again in this section is the funding calculations. We were able in the reauthorization for this program to make a significant change in the law. Under NCLB, when a district got money for professional development, it contained money for this part of the law. It contained provisions for a number of things for the actual professional development, but then it had money for tutoring, they had money for school choice, it had money for class size reduction. We couldn't participate in that. So if the district decided that out of this, $200 million that they got, 10% of it would be for professional development and the rest would go for all the other activities. Only that 10% was shared equitably with private schools for their PD. And so what they reiterate in the law now, the whole allocation for Title II must be divided proportionately between public and private schools. And then the public school can do what it wants in terms of class size reduction, teacher bonuses, recruitment, and whatever. But the private school uses those funds for professional development only. And so that's an important piece that we were able to get in the bill. So there's much more money available for private school professional development than there had been under the previous iterations. And in some cases, we've heard districts still think it's the old law. The guidance is clear, and this is one they can't deviate from. This is where it's clear in the law and in the regulations that the funding split is at the top, and then they use the money for whatever they want to use in the public school. Now, this next part is where I want to spend a little bit of time, the defining professional development. There has been all along some clear guidance in previous iterations about what professional development is to look like. I would say following this clarification in the law, and we had a lot from particularly from our school perspectives, districts not understanding and not approving things that they probably could have. So they're very clear for all professional development. I mean, that's private school as well as public school, what the thing should look like. So they have sort of a definition, for want of a better term, of what professional development is and what it has to include to be considered a quality professional development. So it has to be part of an integrated process for professional development so that the teachers get, the knowledge and skills to enable the children to succeed in the educational enterprise. And there has to be a thought out plan for this process in each school. It has to be what they call in the law sustained, intensive, collaborative, job embedded, data-driven, and classroom focused. So those are key words that I think will be paying more attention to. Is this really classroom focused? My wanting to go to this workshop in Florida in January, is it really based on some data I can show that the students need these services in order to need these services, and I need to have professional development to be able to provide them? Is it classroom focus? Am I talking about instructional time? And is it, job embedded? So if I am a religion teacher and there is a really good workshop on AI, can I justify, is it job embedded, or is it something I'm curious about and would like to go to? So this is where you have to have a professional development plan that each of the PD requests from funding for funding has to be embedded in. And so, the suggestion is that you create a school-wide professional development plan. What are we focusing on this year? what from the test results last year, from teacher observations, from parent observations, and various other ways in which you assess kids. What is it that we should focus on this year? What is the general theme? Maybe you want to look at, certain aspects of academic, reading across disciplines or whatever. You might look at, something in the social behavioral recovery process from the pandemic, safe school environment for learning, media, effective use of media and AI. Right now, I'm sure a lot of people need professional development on and able to effectively use or make decisions about in your classroom. So anyhow, so you get an individual plan then for the teacher that plugs into the overall school goals for this year in professional development. And then when you start to pick out the kinds of programs you want to access funding for, you plug it into the actual plan. And, the issue that we may wind up having some concerns raised by the districts deals with conferences. And they're very clear issues explained and talked about in the guidance in H9 and 10. And that looks about, approving travel, all of that is clearly spelled out. What's important for one-day conferences, or they might consider like the people use funding to come to our NCEA convention. Well, that's over like a 3-day period. But what you would have to do is to look at the program and pick out things that are related to what it is you want them to pay for. So it takes planning on the school level, it takes planning on the individual level. And so in order to justify the expenditures, you have to meet these criteria. And I would say, if you're looking at any professional development this year, to really focus on section H and figure out how you can strategize to meet the requirements. Because for the most part, you can. A one-day conference once a month for 4 months, 5 months on a particular topic could qualify if you relate it for them. Don't expect the district person to make the leaps, help them. So again, it's all very clearly spelled out here. And it would be important, particularly for this Title II, to have these documents with you so that, as I've explained often in the past to, groups, the federal government only speaks to the state education officer. That's whoever is the chief education officer, chancellor, whatever they call it in your state. That person sends the communications down to the district superintendents. And then the district superintendents are supposed to send it to the program managers. So that chain is very often easily broken, particularly if there's a lot of turnover in your LEA office. So I always say it's a good idea, it's worth the paper to bring a copy and leave it with them, because many times they have not seen them at the district level, that when you're trying to tell them this is such and they're like, never heard of it. Well, now they would hear of it if you have it. The allowable activities are clear. The secular religious combinations, that's important, because if you're going to something that, for instance, something that NCEA runs, they will then look at the program and they'll prorate, so that if they take out, religious things, they take out mass things, and then they say, well, probably 60% of this program in this time frame is secular, and so they'll pay for 60% of the registration, the travel, the hotel, etc. And that's clear, hotel, travel, meals, all of that is included in what's allowable under professional development. And then the supplement, that's where we also have to be careful when we are looking at the various programs, that all of these programs, the federal programs, are always supplemental, means they go beyond what you would be able to do on your own. So for instance, you've never been able under any of the programs to get textbooks for your students. because textbooks are an ordinary responsibility of a district, of a school, so that you can get enrichment books for the library, you can get media things that, supplement, but don't supplant. The terminology they use is supplement, so that if you are doing professional development days in school that are, in a sense, required participation, you have to be careful how you strategize on that, because your PD, you should have a PD budget, no matter how small, and that you say, this is what we would pay for this particular meeting. This is what we could afford. And this is what we could do. But we could do a much more extensive program, a more robust program, if we had this person come in and use the title monies to support this program. So again, they will be looking for, is this supplementing or is it supplanting your ordinary responsibilities? Then looking at the next part, Title III, which is the program for English language learners, and that program, more and more, I'm happy to say, more and more of our schools are using the benefits of this program. The purpose, of course, is to help students acquire English language, whether and there's two components to it, whether they are an immigrant coming into the country or a student who was born here, but whose home language is not English. And so there are programs structured for those. The eligibility, besides being an English language learner, is that the school has to be in a district that receives Title III. Some districts do not apply for Title III. They feel they have too many other things they could be using the funding for, and don't have enough to justify a whole program. So if they don't have the program for the district, then you can't participate, obviously, because there's no money to be shared to pay for your services. And it lists down there the administrative details, but also the various ways in which students can be helped, and their teachers. And it's any teacher, not just restricted. The school has the right to have equitable services. And the important piece reiterated is that it's the obligation of the district to identify all English language learners in the district, the way they have to do in IDEA, identify all students suspected of having a disability. So it's a responsibility of the district to identify, and there are ways in which, and they describe that, they can administer the assessments that determine lack of English language proficiency, or ways in which they can help you do it for your own. So I think it's something to look into if you have a sizable number of students who are English language learners, and ways in which, I'm sorry, I lost that page. I chalk with my hands and I keep hitting my computer, sorry. This is not moving on me for some reason. Okay, and then the next piece is Title IV. And that's the student support and academic enrichment grants. Again, that's a lot of components to this. There are three main pieces to this: the program for well-rounded education, for safe and healthy school environment and students, and then the piece for technology. This is found in Section J of the law, and the important piece, and they spell out in each section acceptable uses. So that's important. And in J5, they break it out into the three programs. The well-rounded education has a variety of things embedded in it that will look at various academic supports. The safe and healthy environment looks at student health and safety, and then school climate and culture. And then the technology is really looking at integration of technology and the teacher's ability to effectively do that in the learning environment. There's a little money for hardware and software, but primarily it's for teacher professional development in being able to work through these programs. What's important to keep in mind, there was an awful lot in Title II that mirrors Title IV and vice versa. So, my advice is to be flexible, to look at Title II and the regulations and the guidance, to look at Title IV and see what are the ways in which you can move between the two programs so that you effectively use all of the funding that's allocated for your school. And the best way to do that is to look at what the estimates would be when you develop your individual and your school professional development plan to see, well, can I fund part of this with 2 and then part of this with 4, because there's more money for professional development in terms of teacher integrating technology than there might be for something else in Title II. So, be flexible and figure out ways in which you can bounce this back and forth and be able to, as I say, make the most out of the funding that's allowable for you to utilize. And then the rest of section 4 are small kind of, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at a question, I'll get to it in a minute, that are part of Title IV. And the Title 4B, the Nita Lowy, the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. This is a program that tries to involve the whole community in after-school programs. These are huge grant programs directly funded from the federal U.S. Department of Education. And we as a school are able to, or a diocese, are able to be a direct applicant, which means you then receive direct funding from the federal government and negates a lot of the exemptions you have to some of your programs. Or your students can participate in a program that a district is running. So for the most part, it's more beneficial likely for our schools, particularly our elementary schools, to find out from the district, are you applying for a community learning center grant? These go all year, they go during the summer. They involve a host of public organizations. So if you're an applicant, you get involved with libraries, with museums, with other civic and cultural pieces of environmental things that are out there that you can tap into to bring in more people and a greater community exposure to help these students with after-school learning in a variety of different settings. So if the district is applying for a grant, they're supposed to include you in the planning process. And it's important, that you do that, that you find out ahead of time, and that you are part of the consultation so that part of the program can be useful for your students. And so, it's more than an after school, babysitting thing. This is a real educational experience. There's time for homework and other academic enrichment, as well as I say, some of these civic and cultural experiences. And so what one of our dioceses did several years ago was to get in on the grant planning process. And when they had several sites that were going to run this program in, a couple of school buildings, they were able to get one of the Catholic schools as a site so that anyone can go to any of the sites. It's not assigned zip code. And so the thinking there was that our parents may be more willing to have their students participate if it was in a setting they knew rather than having to go to some other school somewhere. So it's a very good program for all around enrichment. So it's something maybe to look into. And then the last is the national activities in section L. And this is Project SERVE. This is response to emergency situations. And so it deals specifically what the violence criterion, for want of a better term, is. Was the school directly involved? Was it near another school? Is it in the district? And so on. section L5, 6, and 7 deal with, that's a typo, sorry, L7 deal with participation in these programs. The one piece that's important here is that if you are dealing in one of these projects, you get equitable services. And it's not direct funding the way it would be if you dealt with FEMA for some other kind of financial assistance after an emergency activity. So that's a general run through of the provisions that are in this guidance document. This guidance document was released in July of 2023. When this bill was passed in 2015, for us in the private school community, Title I and this Section 8, Title 8 guidance was the most important thing. And every meeting we went to at the Department of Ed, we pressed, when are the Title 8 coming out? When is Title 8 coming out? Well, it finally came out in 2023. And I will say, even though it was not required, guidance does not require public consultation the way the Federal Register regulations require. But I will say the Department of Education, the Office of Non-Public Education, reached out to us several times in the private school community. We submitted comments back to them. It did not go through the public Federal Register process, but we were in consultation with them, saying, well, this would be better changed when we saw the first go round, or maybe you could add this. And they were receptive to most of what we suggested, and most of the questions that are in there, because it's a Q&A. They ask questions and give you the answers in each of those sections. Most of the questions came from the Department of Non-Public, the Office of Non-Public Education, having to deal with questions our schools have submitted. We're trying to deal, the ombudsman says it might be this, it might not. What's the answer? And so the guidance tried to provide the answer. This is what the department would tell the ombudsman or the LEA person who calls on how they see it being operative. But again, if it's not in the law and in the regulations, it can have some differences of opinion and interpretation, but it's the best thing we have to educate our schools, particularly the people who have to do the consultation on what is available and how to effectively use it. And then the last part, is using the consultation, so I have just two general things: be prepared and be proactive. And being prepared means that before you're going into a consultation meeting or into some kind of a mediation with an ombudsman, what do the law, the regulations, and the guidance say? The law you can look at, but the regulations and the guidance pretty much spell out what you need to know. And as I say, make sure that the person you're dealing with is working in the same frame of reference, that they have information that you have, that the guidance and the regulations. And then the other is, to go to these meetings with the necessary data. So if you have to have data about, the enrollment numbers, about poverty numbers, et cetera, that you have that information handy, that doesn't require another meeting because you have to go back and find it. And then, to be proactive. Again, it all comes down to who you're dealing with and how you deal with them. So that it's important that you have some kind of relationship, a working relationship with the person that you're dealing with in the district. And then to know your rights, know what you have a right to. The regulations and the guidance will tell you that. And then make sure that and again, it's in the documents. They have to tell you, this is our allocation. The private schools are X percentage of that. Therefore, this percentage is available to spend on private school students. And what is the PPA, the per pupil allotment? That depends on, the dollars divided by the numbers. And then, the insistence upon equity, that the funding and the services, the quality of the services should be comparable. to those provided by the public school district, and it's clear in the guidance document. What the public school does to meet its needs usually are different experiences from what are needed to service our students. And the focus is on our students, their needs, and how we want to meet them. And then the last thing, to use the services of the ombudsman, and to remember alternative approaches have to comply with the documents and the statutes, the law, and the regulations. So that's a quick run through this 50-page document on what may be available. And so I advise you to download the information. You will get a copy of access to these slides, and the information for the downloads there. It's also, if you go on the NCEA website, ncea.org, and you go to the federal pages, you will find the information there that you can download for regulations and guidance. So I thank you for your willingness to sit through this today. When did the new guidance come in for the Title II funding model? That the Title II funding model began in 2016 with the new law. The guidance was not specifically clear, but the regulations were. Since ESEA was reauthorized as ESSA, the funding for Title II was to be of the full amount, not just the professional development. So if a district has not been dealing with you in that way, you may want to file a formal complaint, go to the ombudsman and say you want to file a formal complaint. We've been not receiving our fair share in the last couple of years. When you do that, make some kind of calculation, don't ask for, funding that's, $2.5 million and you can't spend it in the 18 months that you're allowed to spend it. So be careful about that, but I would raise the issue if that's a problem. Okay, there's the, okay. I don't hear any other question.
Yeah, it appears that was the only question that we have, and thank you for answering that, Sister Dan.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll just close out. So I just want to say thank you all for attending today's NCEA webinar. NCEA continuously strives to improve the quality of our services for our members based on feedback. So we will use your input to inform future work and improve services. And I've inputted the survey where you can input all this information in the chat. So it should take around 5 minutes to complete, and you can finish that at any time. And if you're interested in a certificate of attendance, please include your email address and your name at the end of the survey, since your certificate will be sent via automated email. If you don't get it, please check your spam if you don't see within a few minutes. And to learn more about upcoming webinars, please visit ncea.org/webinar. And if you have any specific questions for Sister Dale, you can reach out to her email, which is right here, and her number.
Yes.
And I just want to say thank you all for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And I'd be happy to follow up if you have other questions that occur as you start reading the guidance document. So thank you for your participation.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.